My name is Carlton Wright, 65 years old and retired after 30 years of teaching high school mathematics. I worked 2 jobs most of my adult life to give my daughter Diane everything she needed to succeed. Now she is a corporate lawyer, married into the Whitaker family, living in a world so different from mine. When she invited me to dinner with her husband's wealthy relatives, I was thrilled despite my aching knees and empty wallet. I took the bus across town, saving every penny as always. I never imagined her greeting would break my heart. If you have ever felt unappreciated by someone you sacrificed everything for, hit subscribe and share where you are watching from. I was born in a small town outside of Pittsburgh to hard-working parents who never finished high school. My father worked at the steel mill, coming home with calloused hands and a persistent cough from the factory air. My mother cleaned houses for wealthy families, sometimes bringing home their cast-off clothes for me to wear. Despite their limited education, they instilled in me a deep respect for learning. I was the first person in my family to attend college, working nights as a janitor to pay tuition. Those years taught me that determination could overcome almost any obstacle. After graduating with my teaching degree, I met Janet, a librarian with kind eyes and a laugh that could light up a room. We married within a year, settling into a modest house that needed work but felt like paradise to us. Diane was born 3 years later, a tiny bundle with Janet's eyes and my stubborn chin. From the moment I held her, I knew I would do anything to give her a better life than I had. Janet and I saved every extra dollar for her college fund, dreaming of the opportunities our daughter would have. But life rarely follows our careful plans. When Diane turned 8, Janet started having headaches that wouldn't go away. The diagnosis was devastating. Stage 4 brain cancer. Within 6 months, my beautiful Janet was gone, leaving me alone to raise our daughter. Those first months without Janet were a fog of grief. I would wake up reaching for her, only to find empty space. Diane and I clung to each other, 2 survivors of a shipwreck. I continued teaching full-time while figuring out how to be both mother and father to a heartbroken little girl. "Dad," Diane asked one night as I tucked her in, "will we be okay without Mom?" "We will," I promised, though I had no idea how. We have each other. Despite my grief, I knew I had to be strong for Diane. I learned to braid her hair for school pictures, awkward at first but improving with practice. I packed her lunches with little notes inside, just as Janet had done. On weekends, we established rituals. Saturday morning pancakes, Sunday afternoon walks in the park where Janet used to take her. As Diane entered middle school, our bond grew even stronger. Every evening, we would sit at the kitchen table, her homework spread out before us. Though I taught high school math, I brushed up on other subjects to help her excel. She inherited my aptitude for numbers, solving equations that challenged even my students. "You could be anything you want," I told her once, watching her effortlessly complete an algebra problem. "I want to be a lawyer," she replied without hesitation. "I want to help people who cannot fight for themselves." Janet would have been so proud of her ambition. I knew then that I would do whatever it took to make her dream come true. As college approached, I faced the harsh reality that our savings would not be enough. Tuition rates had skyrocketed beyond what Janet and I had planned for. Without telling Diane, I took a second job working evenings at a local hardware store. My days became an exhausting marathon, teaching from 7 to 3, dinner with Diane, then working at the store until 11. When Diane was accepted to an Ivy League university with only a partial scholarship, I sold my car to help cover the first semester expenses. I told her it made more sense to take the bus to work, never mentioning the real reason. "Dad, are you sure we can afford this?" she asked, looking at the tuition bill. "Absolutely," I assured her. "Your education is our priority. Your mother and I always wanted this for you." Those college years were lean ones for me. I skipped doctor's appointments, patched my clothes instead of buying new ones, and learned to stretch simple ingredients into a week of meals. But every sacrifice was worth it when I received her excited phone calls about classes and internships. I will never forget her graduation day. Sitting in the audience, watching her walk across that stage in her cap and gown, tears streamed down my face. Janet should have been there, but I felt her presence beside me, sharing my pride. After the ceremony, Diane hugged me tightly. I did it, Dad. And I promise I will always make you proud. You already have, I told her, my voice breaking. You already have. When Diane secured a position at a prestigious law firm, specializing in corporate law, rather than the public service work she had initially planned, I supported her decision. You need to establish yourself first, she explained. I can help people later, when I am financially secure. It seemed reasonable enough. But as months became years, I noticed subtle changes. Our weekly phone calls became monthly, then occasional. Her visits home grew shorter and less frequent. When she did visit, she seemed distracted, constantly checking her phone for work emails. Then came James Whitaker, from a family whose wealth spanned generations. Their courtship was swift, their engagement announced at a party I was not invited to attend. I met him only weeks before their wedding, a handsome man with perfect teeth and a firm handshake. "Carlton, sir," he said, "Diane speaks so highly of you. We must have you over for dinner sometime." That sometime took 3 years to arrive. In the interim, I met his family only briefly at the wedding, where I felt like an extra in an elaborate play. They were polite but distant, clearly assessing my worn suit and public school conversational topics. "Teaching," James's mother had said with a tight smile. "How noble. I have always thought educators are the unsung heroes of our society." Her tone suggested she was glad they remained unsung, safely away from her social circle. I smiled and thanked her, then retreated to my table at the edge of the reception. As Diane climbed the corporate ladder and settled into married life, the distance between us grew. I sent birthday cards, left voicemails, emailed articles I thought might interest her. Sometimes she responded, often she did not. I told myself she was busy building her career and marriage, that this phase would pass. I never stopped being proud of her. When the local paper ran an article about her firm handling a major corporate merger, I framed it. When she was mentioned in a legal journal, I asked the library to order a copy. My fellow teachers grew tired of hearing about my brilliant daughter, the corporate attorney. What I never told anyone was how much I missed her, or how I sometimes drove past her office building during lunch hour, hoping for a glimpse of her entering or leaving. I never went inside. I did not want to embarrass her. The call came on a Tuesday evening as I was reheating leftover pasta, another solitary meal in a string of many. When I saw her name on the caller ID, my heart leapt. It had been nearly 3 months since we had spoken. "Dad," she said, her voice carrying that clipped, efficient tone she had developed in her professional life. "I am calling to invite you to dinner this Friday." "That would be wonderful," I replied, trying to contain my excitement. "Just the two of us?" "Actually, James's entire family will be there. His parents are celebrating their 40th anniversary, and they specifically asked if you could join us." I doubted the specific request came from them, but I appreciated the gesture nonetheless. "I would be honored. Where shall we meet?" "The Monarch," she said, naming one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. 7 o'clock sharp. It is very hard to get reservations there, so please do not be late. After hanging up, I stood in my kitchen, simultaneously thrilled and anxious. The Monarch was the kind of establishment where entrees cost more than I typically spent on groceries for a week. Still, this was an opportunity to reconnect with Diane, to perhaps bridge the growing gap between us. The next day, I withdrew $60 from my carefully maintained savings account and visited the barber for a proper haircut. I spent the evening polishing my best shoes, an 18-year-old pair of Oxfords I reserved for special occasions. I examined my closet critically, settling on my navy suit from my retirement party 5 years ago. It hung a bit loosely now, but a belt would solve that problem. I considered buying something new, but quickly dismissed the idea. My fixed income left little room for luxuries, and the dinner itself would strain my monthly budget if I were expected to pay for my portion. Besides, the navy suit was perfectly serviceable, even if it was not the current style. Friday arrived with unexpected weather challenges. Dark clouds gathered throughout the afternoon, unleashing a steady downpour by the time I needed to leave. My arthritic knee, a souvenir from an old basketball injury, throbbed in protest. The sensible choice would have been to call a taxi, but that would cost nearly $30 each way. The bus fare was $3, a much more reasonable expense. I left early, allowing extra time for the crosstown journey. The bus was crowded with commuters, many soaking wet from the rain. I found a seat near the back, wedged between a teenager with blaring headphones and a woman juggling several shopping bags. The air inside was humid with the collective dampness of passengers, windows fogged with condensation. The route required a transfer downtown, leaving me exposed to the elements for 12 minutes while waiting for the connecting bus. My umbrella, cheaply made and already showing signs of surrender, provided minimal protection. By the time the second bus arrived, my pant legs were soaked from the knee down, and water had seeped into my right shoe. Despite these challenges, I arrived at the Monarch 30 minutes early. Rather than enter immediately, I stood under the awning of a neighboring building, not wanting to appear over-anxious. I watched as valets scurried to park luxury vehicles, marveling at cars that cost more than my house. At precisely 6:50, I approached the restaurant entrance, attempting to smooth my dampened appearance. The hostess eyed me with a barely concealed look of assessment. "Good evening, sir. Do you have a reservation?" "I am joining the Whitaker party," I replied, straightening my shoulders. Her demeanor shifted subtly. "Of course. They have reserved our premier private dining room. Please follow me." As we wound through the main dining area, I felt conspicuously out of place. Crystal chandeliers cast a flattering glow over tables covered in pristine white linens. Well-dressed patrons engaged in quiet conversation, while servers glided between tables with practiced precision. The private room was already occupied when I entered. Diane spotted me immediately, rising from her seat to greet me. For a brief, hopeful moment, her face lit up with genuine warmth. "Dad, you made it," she said, embracing me with a quick, perfunctory hug. I noticed her discreetly wiping her hand on her napkin afterward. "I would not miss it," I replied, trying to ignore the gesture. "Thank you for inviting me." Diane led me around the table, performing introductions. James stood to shake my hand firmly. "Great to see you again, Carlton." His parents, Edward and Margaret Whitaker, offered polite nods without rising. Edward was a distinguished man with silver hair and the confident posture of someone who has never questioned his place in the world. Margaret's carefully maintained appearance spoke of regular appointments with exclusive salons and spas. "So you are the teacher," Edward said, making it sound like an exotic occupation. "Diane tells us you recently retired." 5 years ago, I corrected gently. "After 30 years teaching mathematics, noble profession," he replied dismissively, echoing his wife's wedding comment before turning his attention back to his drink. Also present were James's brother Thomas and his wife Stephanie, their sister Elizabeth and her husband Robert, and a cousin named William, who worked with Edward at the family investment firm. Each acknowledged me with varying degrees of interest before resuming their previous conversations. I stood awkwardly, feeling like an anthropologist observing a foreign culture. Their discussions revolved around topics entirely outside my experience: the performance of certain stocks, a recent gallery opening, plans for someone's house in Aspen. Diane had seamlessly integrated herself into this world, contributing opinions about wine regions and private school selections. When had my daughter, raised on macaroni and cheese dinners and public library adventures, become this polished stranger? I felt a pang of something between pride and loss. She had succeeded beyond my wildest hopes, yet somehow I had lost the girl who once fell asleep against my shoulder during movie nights. A waiter appeared, with menus bound in leather, discussing the evening specials with reverence usually reserved for religious texts. The prices were not listed, a sure sign that they were astronomical. I calculated how many hours of teaching each entree would have cost me. The conversation flowed around me, occasionally including me with questions that highlighted my different background rather than creating connection. "Carlton, have you ever been to Europe?" Margaret asked. "No, I have not had that pleasure," I replied. "Oh, you simply must go. We took the children to Paris every summer when they were growing up. So educational." I nodded, not mentioning that my international experiences were limited to a weekend in Toronto 20 years ago. Instead, I attempted to participate by asking about their anniversary. 40 years is quite an achievement. What is your secret to a successful marriage? Edward laughed. Separate checking accounts and a good prenup. The table erupted in laughter, while Margaret playfully swatted his arm. I smiled politely, thinking of Janet and our shared account that never contained much but was always enough for us. We had never needed legal documents to define our commitment. As appetizers were served, dishes I could neither pronounce nor identify, I found myself increasingly sidelined in the conversation. Diane occasionally glanced my way with an expression I could not quite read. Was it concern? Embarrassment? I tried to catch her eye several times, hoping for our old conspiratorial connection, but she remained engaged with the others. When the main course was about to be served, the waitstaff began rearranging seating to accommodate the large platters. The server, a young man with impeccable posture, gestured toward an empty chair beside Diane. "Sir, would you prefer to sit here next to your daughter for the main course?" Before I could answer, I noticed Diane's expression change. Her nose wrinkled slightly as I moved toward the indicated seat. She shifted her chair, creating distance between us. The action was subtle but unmistakable. "Don't sit here," she said in a voice loud enough for the entire table to hear. "You smell like the bus." For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The words hung in the air, sharp and unexpected. I stood frozen, one hand still on the back of the chair, looking at the daughter I had raised alone after losing the love of my life. Then came the laughter. It started with a snort from Thomas, followed by Elizabeth's barely suppressed giggle. Soon the entire table was laughing, James included, though he at least had the decency to try hiding it behind his napkin. Edward Whittaker made no such attempt. "Can't you afford a car, old man?" he asked between chuckles. "Even my gardener drives himself to work." I remained still, my face carefully composed into what I hoped was a neutral expression. Inside, something was breaking. Every sacrifice, every extra shift, every dinner eaten alone while Diane was at college flashed through my mind. I had sold my car 6 years ago to help pay for her law school application fees and prep courses, a fact she clearly did not remember or chose to ignore. "I find public transportation to be environmentally responsible," I said quietly, proud that my voice remained steady. Diane was still laughing, now adding, "Dad has always been frugal to a fault. Remember when you used to rewrap my Christmas presents to save paper? That had been during the year after Janet died, when grief and unexpected medical bills had left me struggling to provide even a modest Christmas. I had saved everything, determined that Diane would still have presents to open. Now it was reduced to an amusing anecdote for her wealthy in-laws. The server, witnessing my humiliation, intervened with professional courtesy. "Sir, perhaps you would be more comfortable in this seat." He indicated a chair at the opposite end of the table, as far from Diane as possible, while still being part of the group. "Thank you," I said, meeting his eyes with dignity. His slight nod contained more kindness than my own daughter had shown me. As I took my new seat, I noticed several patrons at nearby tables watching the scene with undisguised interest. My cheeks burned with shame, not because I had taken the bus or because my clothes were slightly damp, but because my child had publicly rejected me for these things. I remembered holding 8-year-old Diane as she cried for her mother, promising that we would always have each other's backs. I remembered driving her to her first legal internship, her nervous excitement as she straightened her new blazer. I remembered skipping necessary dental work so she could have the laptop she needed for school. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A text from Ruth, my elderly neighbor, asking if she could borrow some sugar when I returned home. The ordinary request from someone who had never made me feel less than was strangely comforting. In my neighborhood, we looked out for each other without judgment. The meal continued with elaborate dishes placed before us. I ate mechanically, barely tasting the expertly prepared food. The conversation flowed around me, no one making particular effort to include me now. Occasionally, I would catch Diane glancing in my direction, but she would quickly look away when our eyes met. I tried to participate when topics arose that I could contribute to, education policy or local politics, but my comments were met with polite nods before the conversation shifted back to subjects exclusive to their social circle. The membership committee at the club has become ridiculously selective, Edward complained, swirling amber liquid in a crystal tumbler. They rejected the Hendersons last month, and Philip Henderson practically owns half of downtown. Speaking of ownership, Margaret interjected, have you all secured your summer rentals in the Hamptons? The good properties are being snatched up already. James looked at Diane. We should make our arrangements soon, especially now with your promotion and bonus coming through. Diane nodded. I was thinking we might try Martha's Vineyard this year instead. More privacy. I sipped my water, remembering our summer vacations when Diane was young. Day trips to the public pool or occasionally the state park if I could afford the gas. Once, for her 16th birthday, I had splurged on a weekend at a modest motel near the beach. She had been delighted, building sandcastles like a much younger child, free from the pressure of being the perfect student for those brief days. The check arrived after desserts I had barely touched. The server placed the leather folder discreetly at the center of the table. Edward reached for it automatically, but not before I glimpsed the total. Over $1,200 for a single meal, more than my monthly pension. Don't worry about contributing, Carlton, Edward said with magnanimous condescension. I know teachers' pensions are hardly generous. That statement, delivered with casual cruelty masked as kindness, was the final straw. Something shifted within me, a lifetime of accommodating others, giving way to a moment of clarity. As Edward reached for the bill, I made my decision. Years of quiet sacrifice and dignified restraint crystallized into a single moment of resolve. I leaned forward. Actually, I would like to get this, I said, my voice carrying more authority than it had all evening. The table fell silent. Edward's hand paused midair. Diane looked at me with alarm. Dad, she began, that is really not necessary. Edward is happy to cover it. I insist, I replied, maintaining eye contact with her. It would be my pleasure to treat everyone tonight. James looked uncomfortable. Carlton, we know this place is pretty expensive. I am well aware of the cost, I said calmly, standing to reach for the check. Edward reluctantly released the folder. As I opened it to examine the total, I was acutely conscious of the table watching me, likely expecting me to blanch at the amount. $1,236 before tip. A sum that would have significant impact on my careful budget for months to come. As I considered my next move, I noticed Diane's designer purse sitting open beside her chair. The edge of her credit card was visible, the platinum gleam catching the light. I recalled the day she had called to tell me about receiving that card, reserved for the firm's top earners. Only 10 attorneys have one, she had boasted. It has no spending limit. In that moment, a memory surfaced. Diane at 12 years old, sitting at our kitchen table as I explained household finances. Money is just a tool, I had told her. It is how we use it that matters. Now my daughter had abundant financial tools but seemed to have forgotten their purpose. She had also forgotten the value of respect, apparently believing that wealth entitled her to mock the very person who had ensured she would never go without necessities as he sometimes had. With deliberate casualness, I set down the bill folder and reached into my inner jacket pocket as if retrieving my wallet. As I leaned slightly forward, I smoothly slid Diane's credit card from her purse with my other hand, a move obscured from the table's view by my body position. Excuse me for just a moment, I said, standing with both the bill and her card now discreetly in my possession. I walked to the payment station located in the corridor outside the private dining room. The server who had shown me kindness earlier approached. Are you sure about this, sir? He asked quietly, having witnessed enough to understand the dynamics at play. Very sure, I replied, handing him Diane's card. And please add 20% for your excellent service. He processed the payment efficiently, returning with the receipt for signature. I signed Diane's name with a reasonable approximation of her distinctive style, having seen it countless times on birthday cards and Christmas gifts over the years. Was this technically wrong? Perhaps, but in the moral accounting between us, the balance remained significantly in my favor. With receipt in hand, I returned to the table where conversation had resumed, likely speculation about whether my card would be declined. I placed Diane's platinum card directly in front of her plate and took my seat. Thank you all for a lovely evening, I said pleasantly. Diane stared at her credit card, confusion evident on her face. She picked it up, looked at me, then glanced toward her purse. The moment she realized what had happened, her expression transformed from confusion to shock to anger in rapid succession. "Dad, what did you just do?" she demanded, her voice tight. Edward Whitaker leaned forward. "What's going on?" I smiled calmly. "I simply took care of the bill, as I said I would." James noticed the card in Diane's hand and understood immediately. His eyes widened. "Carlton, did you just use Diane's card without permission?" "I believe I have had lifetime permission to ensure my daughter's welfare and education," I replied evenly. "Perhaps she might extend the same courtesy to me for a single meal." Diane's face flushed deep red. "You had no right," she hissed. "That is my card, not yours." "I am well aware of whose card it is," I said, "just as I am aware of whose money paid for your undergraduate tuition, law school application fees, LSAT prep courses, first apartment security deposit, and professional wardrobe when you started at the firm." Edward's face darkened with anger. "This is completely inappropriate. I should call the manager." "Feel free," I replied, maintaining my composure. "I would be interested to hear their opinion on a daughter who publicly humiliates her father about taking public transportation, when the reason I no longer own a car is because I sold it to pay for her final semester of law school." That revelation silenced the table. Diane looked stricken. "What are you talking about? You said you preferred taking the bus." "And you believed that?" I asked gently. "What would you have had me say? That I could not afford both your education and basic transportation? That I chose you, as I always have?" I turned to address the entire table. For those who may be curious, I took a second job for 8 years to ensure Diane could attend the schools of her choice without student loans. I sold family heirlooms, including my father's watch and my wedding silver, to cover unexpected expenses. I have never taken a vacation that wasn't centered around visiting Diane or helping her move into a new apartment. "Dad, stop," Diane pleaded, her earlier arrogance replaced by embarrassment. "When Janet, my wife, died, I promised her I would make sure our daughter had every opportunity." I continued, my voice steady. "I have kept that promise, even when it meant going without necessities myself." Margaret Whitaker was watching me with an unexpected expression of respect, perhaps even sympathy. "I had no idea," she said softly. "Why would you?" I replied without rancor. "Diane herself seems to have forgotten." "This is still no excuse for taking someone's credit card," Edward insisted, though with less conviction. "You are absolutely right," I acknowledged. "Under normal circumstances, it would be inexcusable. But I would suggest that publicly humiliating the person who sacrificed everything for you might also fall into that category." James had remained silent, his expression thoughtful rather than angry. Now he spoke, surprising me with his response. "He has a point, Diane. What you said earlier was pretty harsh." Diane's eyes filled with tears, though whether from anger or shame was unclear. "So this is revenge? Making me look bad in front of everyone?" "No," I said gently. "This is a lesson about respect, something I thought I had taught you long ago. Money comes and goes, but how we treat people defines who we are." I reached into my pocket and withdrew a small velvet box, something I had been carrying all evening, waiting for the right moment to present it. "I had been saving for months to have this restored for you." Diane took the box with trembling hands and opened it. Inside lay her mother's wedding ring, the modest diamond now properly secured in its setting, the band polished to a warm glow. Janet had left it for Diane in her will, to be given when she was old enough to appreciate its significance. "I notice you never wear it," I said quietly. "I thought perhaps it needed cleaning, that maybe the setting felt insecure." The jeweler assured me it is now perfect. Diane stared at the ring, tears now falling freely. The table had fallen completely silent, the earlier laughter and casual cruelty replaced by uncomfortable awareness. "I would rather smell like 1,000 bus rides than forget where I came from," I said, standing to leave, "or who helped me get where I am going." "This is theft," Diane said, her voice shaking as she held the ring box. "You stole my credit card." I remained standing, surprisingly calm, in the face of her accusation. Is that really the issue you want to focus on right now? Edward Whittaker rose from his seat, his face flushed with indignation. I'm going to speak with the manager. This is completely unacceptable behavior. Please do, I replied. I would be happy to explain to them how your entire family laughed when Diane said I smelled like the bus. I wonder if they would find that acceptable in their establishment. Edward hesitated, clearly not accustomed to being challenged. Dad, Diane said, her tone shifting from accusation to plea. You are embarrassing me. The irony of her statement struck me as profound. That is an interesting choice of words, I observed. When exactly did you become concerned about embarrassment tonight? Was it before or after you publicly commented on my odor? The other diners in the restaurant had given up any pretense of not listening. Several nearby tables had fallen silent, attention clearly focused on our unfolding drama. I turned to address the entire table. Let me be perfectly clear about something. When Janet died, Diane was 8 years old. I had to figure out how to be both mother and father while working full-time. There were nights I sat at our kitchen table after Diane was asleep, trying to figure out how to stretch our budget until the next payday. I looked directly at Diane. Remember when your school announced that surprise trip to Washington, D.C. in 6th grade? $300 with 2 weeks' notice. I told you not to worry, that we would figure it out. Her expression softened slightly with recognition. You worked extra shifts that week. Every night for 2 weeks, I confirmed. Plus I sold my baseball card collection, the one my father gave me. I continued, my voice steady but increasing in intensity. When you needed braces, I took out a second mortgage. When you wanted to attend that summer program at Yale, I canceled my knee surgery. When your car broke down during your internship, I sent you money from my retirement account and ate ramen for a month. James was watching me with growing respect, while his father looked increasingly uncomfortable. Mr. Wright, Margaret Whittaker said suddenly, her voice gentler than it had been all evening. I had no idea. Diane never mentioned any of this. Of course she didn't, I replied without accusation. She was busy becoming part of your world, where people apparently judge others by whether they drive or take the bus. That's not fair, Diane protested, though with less conviction. Isn't it? I asked. When was the last time you took public transportation, Diane? When was the last time you had to choose between a new pair of shoes and paying the electric bill? That's different. I worked hard to get where I am. Yes, you did, I agreed. You worked exceptionally hard, and I am prouder of your accomplishments than I can express. But you did not get here alone. Edward attempted to reassert control of the situation. This is all very touching, but it doesn't change the fact that you used someone else's credit card without permission. James unexpectedly spoke up. Dad, give it a rest. I think we all need to acknowledge that Diane's comments started this whole thing. Edward looked at his son with surprise. You're taking his side? I'm suggesting there's more than one side here, James replied firmly. And I'm not comfortable with how we've treated Carlton tonight. Diane wiped tears from her eyes, mascara smudging across her cheek. So this is your plan? Turn my husband against me? Make a scene in a public restaurant? No, Diane. This wasn't planned at all. When I received your invitation, I was genuinely happy. I thought perhaps you wanted to reconnect, that you missed me even a fraction as much as I've missed you. My voice finally broke slightly. I have called you every Sunday for 3 years, regardless of whether you pick up. I have sent cards for every holiday and birthday. I have kept your childhood bedroom exactly as you left it, just in case you ever wanted to come home, even for a visit. The restaurant had grown completely silent. Even the servers had paused, standing discreetly against the walls. Do you know what I did last Christmas, Diane? I volunteered at the community center because the alternative was sitting alone in our house, looking at photographs, and remembering when we used to make cookies together for Santa. Diane's expression crumpled, genuine pain replacing her earlier anger. You never said anything. What should I have said? That I was lonely? That I wished my successful daughter would spare even an hour for her father during the holidays? Would that have made you more likely to visit? Or would it have felt like an obligation? A burden? I retrieved a wallet from my pocket, opening it to reveal a photograph of a much younger Diane, smiling widely with a gap where her front teeth should be. I have carried this everywhere since your first grade picture day. Every time I look at it, I remember promising you that I would always be there for you, no matter what. Tears streamed down Diane's face now. Dad, I don't expect your life to revolve around me, I said gently. I want you to have your career, your marriage, your success. All I have ever wanted is your happiness. But tonight, for the first time, I saw that my presence in your life has become an embarrassment to you, and that is something I cannot accept. I placed the wallet back in my pocket and straightened my shoulders. So yes, I used your credit card without permission. Consider it partial repayment for the lifetime of support I have given freely and would continue to give without hesitation or expectation of return, if only you treated me with basic human dignity. James stood and approached me, extending his hand. Carlton, I owe you an apology. We all do. Edward started to protest, but Margaret placed a restraining hand on his arm. Edward, not now, she said firmly. Diane looked utterly lost, the sophisticated corporate attorney facade completely stripped away. In its place was my little girl, suddenly recognizing she had wounded someone who loved her unconditionally. I am not angry with you, Diane, I said softly. I am disappointed, not in your success or your marriage or your new life. I am disappointed that you seem to have forgotten that a person's worth is not measured by their income or mode of transportation. I picked up my coat, slightly damp from the earlier rain. Your mother would have been so proud of everything you have accomplished, but she would have been heartbroken to hear you speak to me the way you did tonight. With that final statement, I turned and walked toward the exit, head held high despite the tears threatening to spill from my eyes. The rain had resumed when I stepped outside the Monarch, a steady downpour that matched my emotional state. I stood under the restaurant's awning, watching water cascade from the edges like tears. A valet approached, then retreated when he realized I wasn't waiting for a car. James emerged from the restaurant, holding an umbrella. Carlton, let me drive you home. Thank you, but no, I replied. I think I need some time alone. He hesitated. Are you sure? It's pouring, and the bus will be fine, I assured him. I've weathered worse storms than this. I walked to the nearby bus stop and sat on the bench, protected only partially by the small shelter. Within minutes, I was alone again with my thoughts and the rhythmic sound of rain on metal. The evening replayed in my mind, each moment of disappointment and revelation cycling through like scenes from a film I never wanted to watch. The bus arrived, nearly empty at this late hour. The driver nodded in greeting, a simple acknowledgement that contained more humanity than I had experienced at dinner. I sat near the window, watching the city lights blur through the rain-streaked glass. By the time I arrived home, my clothing was soaked and my heart heavy. The house was dark and silent, a familiar emptiness that usually didn't bother me but tonight felt oppressive. I changed into dry clothes, made a cup of tea, and sat in my recliner, Janet's photograph watching me from the side table. I don't know if I did the right thing, I told her image, but I couldn't just sit there and take it anymore. The next morning brought the beginning of 7 days of silence from Diane. My phone remained stubbornly quiet, no calls or messages appearing. I had expected anger, perhaps even a legal threat about the credit card, but the silence was somehow worse. Had I permanently damaged our relationship? The thought kept me awake through long nights. Ruth from next door brought over banana bread, claiming she had made too much but clearly sensing something was wrong. Frank from across the street invited me to watch the game, his way of checking in without prying. My retired colleagues called with lunch invitations, small kindnesses that reminded me I was not alone in the world, even if my only child was absent. You seem down, Carlton, observed Henry, my former fellow math teacher, over sandwiches at our regular diner. Everything okay with Diane? I gave him an abbreviated version of events, leaving out the more painful details. His weathered face creased with sympathy. Kids sometimes forget the climb once they reach the summit, he said. Doesn't mean they won't remember eventually. I nodded, grateful for his wisdom. I hope so. On the 8th day, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I found James standing on my porch alone. May I come in? He asked, his expression serious but not unfriendly. I stepped back to allow him entry, curious about this unexpected visit. "Can I offer you coffee?" "That would be great, thanks." I led him into my modest kitchen, where the coffee maker from Diane's college years still functioned despite its outdated design. As I prepared 2 cups, James examined the refrigerator door, covered with photographs and memorabilia from Diane's childhood. "She was cute," he commented, pointing to a Halloween picture of 8-year-old Diane dressed as a mathematician, complete with oversized glasses and a calculator. "That was her idea," I said, smiling at the memory. "Most girls her age wanted to be princesses." James accepted the offered coffee and took a seat at the kitchen table. "I owe you an apology, Carlton. You weren't the one who made the comment about the bus," I pointed out. "No, but I laughed," he admitted. "And I've never stood up to my family's, well, let's call it what it is, their snobbery." I appreciated his candor. "It can be difficult to challenge family dynamics." "That's generous of you to say." He sipped his coffee. "The thing is, I've never really seen Diane the way she was at dinner. She's usually the most compassionate person in the room." "She used to be," I agreed. "Her mother's influence, I think." James nodded. "You should know that what happened at dinner has caused some serious reflection for both of us. It was actually our first major fight. I felt a pang of regret. I never wanted to cause problems in your marriage." "You didn't," he assured me. "If anything, you exposed problems that were already there. My family's attitude, Diane's desire to impress them, my failure to stand up for what's right." He stared into his cup for a moment. "Diane wanted to come today, but she's afraid you won't forgive her." "She's my daughter," I said simply. "There's nothing to forgive." "There is, though," James insisted, "and she knows it. She's been telling me stories about all you did for her growing up. Things I never knew." I shrugged. "That's just being a parent." "No," James said firmly. "My parents hired people to raise us. They threw money at our problems and called it parenting. What you did was actual parenting." We talked for nearly an hour. James revealed aspects of Diane I hadn't known. Her pro bono work with domestic violence survivors, her mentoring of first-generation college students at her alma mater, her insistence that their household staff receive health insurance. The core of the daughter I had raised was still there, beneath the veneer of corporate success. "She's been under tremendous pressure," James explained. "The first female partner track attorney in her department. My mother's constant judgment about everything from her clothing to her career choices. She was trying so hard to be perfect for everyone, except me," I observed without bitterness. "Especially you," he countered. "She talks about you constantly at home, how you taught her to always be prepared, to stand up for herself, to never cut corners ethically." As James prepared to leave, he handed me an envelope. "This is from Diane. She wrote it 3 times before she was satisfied." After he departed, I sat with the sealed envelope for several minutes before opening it. Inside was a letter written on expensive stationery, Diane's elegant handwriting filling both sides. "Dear Dad," it began. "I have started this letter a dozen times, and no opening seems adequate to address what happened. I'm sorry. Feels insulting in its inadequacy. Yet I am sorry, more deeply than I can express." She continued, acknowledging her behavior and recognizing the lifetime of sacrifice I had made. She wrote about pressure and insecurity, about wanting to belong in her new world while feeling like an imposter. She described crying in her office bathroom after important meetings, terrified of being exposed as someone who didn't truly belong among her wealthy colleagues. "None of this excuses how I treated you," she wrote. "There is no excuse for that. You deserved better from the daughter you raised to be better." The letter ended with a request, not a demand, to meet for coffee when I felt ready. She provided 3 possible times, but emphasized that it was entirely my choice whether to accept. 2 days later, I texted Diane and suggested meeting at the small cafe halfway between our homes. Neutral territory seemed appropriate for this delicate reconciliation. When I arrived, she was already there, seated at a corner table. Gone was the polished corporate attorney from the dinner. Instead, she wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. She looked younger, more like the daughter I remembered. She stood when she saw me, uncertainty in her eyes. "Dad." I opened my arms, and she stepped into them, breaking into quiet sobs against my shoulder. We stood like that for several moments, other patrons discreetly averting their eyes from our emotional reunion. When we finally sat down, Diane wiped her eyes. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "It's not about deserving," I told her. "Love doesn't work that way." What I said was unforgivable. "Nothing between us is unforgivable," I assured her. "But it did hurt. Deeply." Diane nodded, fresh tears threatening. "I know. And the worst part is, I didn't even mean it. I was so nervous about you meeting James's family again. So worried about everything being perfect. When you arrived, all I could think about was what they might be thinking." "And what do you think they were thinking?" I asked gently. She looked down at her hands. "Honestly, nothing bad. That's what makes it even worse. James's mom actually mentioned how nice it was that you took public transportation instead of contributing to pollution." The irony wasn't lost on either of us. We shared a small, hesitant smile, the first step toward healing. "I sold your mother's pearl earrings to help pay for that dinner," I admitted quietly. "I wanted to bring a nice gift for Margaret." Diane's expression crumpled again. "Oh, Dad, I've been so blind." "We both have," I acknowledged. "I should have been more honest about my financial situation instead of pretending everything was fine." We talked for hours, really talked, in a way we hadn't in years. Diane shared her insecurities about her career, her marriage, her place in two worlds that never quite seemed to align. I opened up about my loneliness, my health concerns, my pride in her success mixed with fear that I was becoming irrelevant in her life. As we prepared to leave, Diane hesitated. "Can we try again? A family dinner at your house next time?" "I would like that," I replied. "But fair warning, it won't be the Monarch." She smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. "Good. I hear their portions are too small anyway." It wasn't an immediate fix. Trust, once damaged, requires time and consistent effort to rebuild. But it was a beginning, a foundation upon which we could construct a more authentic relationship. 6 months passed, bringing gradual but meaningful changes to my relationship with Diane. Where once there had been monthly phone calls at best, now we spoke several times a week. Our conversations no longer centered on surface pleasantries, but delved into real substance. Discussions about books we were reading, current events, and sometimes vulnerable admissions about our fears and hopes. The most significant change was Diane's presence in my life, not as an obligation but as a genuine choice. She began dropping by unannounced, sometimes just for a quick cup of coffee before work. She asked questions about her mother, wanting to know details I had previously thought might be too painful to share. "Tell me about your wedding day," she requested one evening as we sat on my porch watching the sunset. "I've only seen the photographs." I described how Janet had nearly tripped walking down the aisle, how we had written our own vows despite traditional family pressure, how it had rained unexpectedly during the outdoor reception and guests had danced anyway, water soaking their formal wear. "She would have loved the woman you've become," I told Diane, though she might have suggested a little more work-life balance. Diane laughed. "James says the same thing. I'm trying." Her relationship with James seemed to have deepened following our confrontation. He visited often, sometimes with Diane, sometimes alone. He helped me repair my leaking roof, refusing to call professionals despite his complete lack of construction experience. We made a mess of it and ended up hiring experts anyway, but the afternoon of shared effort meant more than the result. More surprisingly, James maintained some distance from his parents, setting boundaries that had never existed before. "They mean well," he explained, "but their values and mine don't always align." I never really questioned that until the night at the Monarch. Diane made efforts to integrate the different parts of her life rather than compartmentalizing them. She invited my retired teacher friends to her firm's charity gala, proudly introducing them to her colleagues. She brought James's sister Elizabeth to our neighborhood block party, where Elizabeth ended up exchanging recipes with Ruth from next door. For my part, I found new purpose beyond waiting for Diane's calls. I volunteered at the community center, teaching math to struggling high school students. Many came from single-parent homes and saw in me something of their own parents' struggles. I understood their challenges in ways their regular teachers sometimes couldn't. "Mr. Wright gets it," I overheard one teenager telling another. "He doesn't just talk about overcoming obstacles, he's actually done it." That simple statement brought me more satisfaction than any professional accolade ever had. Janet had always insisted that our greatest contribution was not what we accomplished, but what we helped others achieve. As Christmas approached, Diane surprised me with an unexpected proposal. "Would you mind if we had the holiday dinner at your house this year? Just us, James, and maybe a few close friends?" "I'd be honored," I replied, though privately concerned about hosting in my modest home. "But are you sure you wouldn't prefer your place? It's more spacious." "Dad, I grew up in this house. All my best Christmas memories happened right here. Besides, James and I bought an obscene amount of decorations last year and barely used half. Let us help you set up?" The day before Christmas Eve, Diane and James arrived with boxes of ornaments, lights, and greenery. Together, we transformed my living room into a holiday wonderland. As Diane hung ornaments on the tree, she paused, holding a homemade star she had crafted in second grade. "Remember when I made this?" she asked. "Mom helped me with the glitter. It was everywhere for weeks," I recalled. "I was finding sparkles in the carpet until Easter." We spent Christmas Eve cooking together, Diane attempting her mother's recipes with mixed success. The turkey was slightly overdone, the potatoes a bit lumpy, but it was the most delicious meal I had eaten in years. Our guests included Henry and his wife, Ruth from next door, and two of Diane's colleagues who had no family nearby. The conversation flowed easily, laughter filling rooms that had been quiet for too long. After dinner, Diane pulled me aside. "Dad, I want you to know something. I've been thinking about what happened, about how easy it was for me to get caught up in appearances and status." "That's natural," I assured her. "You've worked hard for your success." "Maybe," she acknowledged, "but success that costs you your values isn't really success at all. You taught me that, even though I temporarily forgot." She handed me a small package. "This isn't your real gift, that's under the tree, but I wanted to give you this privately." Inside was a key and a document. I looked at her questioningly. "It's a car," she explained. "Nothing fancy, just reliable. And before you protest, it's not charity and it's not guilt. It's just a daughter finally being able to do something for her father, who has done everything for her." I started to object, but she continued, "The document is even more important. I've set up a trust for your healthcare expenses. No arguments. If you won't let me help directly, at least let me ensure you never have to choose between medication and groceries again." Tears filled my eyes. "Diane, this isn't necessary." "Yes, it is," she insisted. "Not because you need my help, but because I need to give it. Because that's what family does for each other." That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my living room looking at the twinkling lights on the tree. The house felt different, warmer somehow, as if the evening's joy had seeped into the very walls. A year had passed since that painful dinner at the Monarch. In that time, I had learned that dignity doesn't come from what others think of you, but from staying true to your values even when it's difficult. I had learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting hurt, but about choosing relationship over resentment. Most importantly, I had learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is setting boundaries that allow both parties to maintain their self-respect. Diane had changed too. The corporate facade had softened, revealing more of the compassionate, thoughtful person she had always been beneath the surface. She still worked hard, still achieved impressive professional success, but no longer at the expense of her personal connections. Last week, we returned to the Monarch for the first time since that fateful night. It was Diane's idea, a symbolic reclaiming of painful territory. This time, she introduced me to her colleagues with unmistakable pride. "This is my father, Carlton Wright," she said. "Former mathematics teacher and the reason I understand the value of hard work and integrity." No one commented when I arrived by cab, my own choice despite having a car now. No one made jokes about my profession or income. Instead, they listened attentively as I shared stories from my teaching days, genuinely interested in the perspective of someone who had measured success not in dollars but in young lives influenced. As we parted that evening, Diane hugged me tightly. "I love you, Dad. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I deserved it." "That's the thing about love," I told her. "It's not about deserving. It's about choosing, every day, to see the best in someone even when they're not at their best." The wisdom of my 65 years has taught me this. True wealth is not found in bank accounts or prestigious addresses. It lies in relationships built on mutual respect, in the courage to stand up for your dignity without diminishing others, and in the grace to forgive when forgiveness seems impossible. Sometimes the most important lessons come wrapped in painful packages. The bus might not be as comfortable as a luxury car, but the view of humanity it provides is infinitely more valuable. I wonder, have you ever had to stand up for your dignity when someone you loved took you for granted? How did you balance self-respect with forgiveness? Share your stories in the comments below. And if this journey of reconciliation touched something in your heart, please subscribe to hear more reflections from my lifetime of learning the hard way. Thank you for listening. And remember, in a world that often measures worth by material success, the most valuable things we possess are the connections we nurture and the integrity we maintain.